The ocean seemed alive, its surface shimmering with deceptive calm. Then came a sudden tug, sharp and unrelenting, pulling down into a world of darkness. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, as if the water itself had turned against its prey. Something massive moved just out of sight, its sleek form slicing through the water like a phantom. The battle for air became a battle for life. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start with today's shark attack story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from. Click the like button, and let's get into the story. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the tranquil waters of Shark Bay. Dr. James Hartley stood on the weathered dock, his salt and pepper hair ruffling in the gentle breeze. At 55, he still possessed the enthusiasm of a young scientist, his eyes bright with anticipation for the day ahead. James meticulously checked his diving gear, a ritual he had performed countless times over his 3-decade career as a marine biologist. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, securing straps and testing regulators. The familiar scent of neoprene and sea air filled his nostrils, a comforting reminder of his life's work. "Another beautiful day in paradise, eh, Doc?" called out Sam, his research assistant, as he approached with a clipboard in hand. James looked up, a warm smile creasing his tanned face. "Couldn't ask for better conditions, Sam. We should get some excellent data today." Sam's expression faltered slightly, his young face betraying a hint of concern. "About that, Doc? There have been some reports from the local fishermen. They've spotted a few great whites in the area, bigger than usual." James waved a dismissive hand. "Sharks are always in these waters, Sam. It's their home after all. We've never had any issues before." "I know, but these sightings are closer to shore than normal. Maybe we should postpone the dive just to be safe." Sam persisted, his voice tinged with worry. James paused, considering his assistant's words. He understood the young man's concern, but the thought of delaying his research grated against his scientific drive. They had a narrow window to collect data on the seasonal migration patterns of several marine species, and every day counted. "I appreciate your concern, Sam. I really do," James said, his tone gentle but firm. "But we can't let every rumor of a shark sighting derail our work. We'll take all the usual precautions, and I'll keep a sharp eye out. This data is crucial for understanding the impact of climate change on marine migration patterns." Sam nodded reluctantly, knowing better than to argue further with the seasoned scientist. "All right, Doc. Just be careful out there, okay?" James clapped a reassuring hand on Sam's shoulder. "Always am, my boy. Now let's get this show on the road." As they loaded the last of the equipment onto the research vessel, a sleek 30-foot boat named the Nautilus, James couldn't help but feel a familiar thrill of excitement. Despite the hundreds of dives under his belt, each expedition into the underwater world filled him with a sense of wonder. The boat's engine rumbled to life, and James skillfully navigated out of the harbor. The coastline of Western Australia slowly receded behind them, the rugged beauty of Shark Bay stretching out in all directions. James breathed deeply, savoring the salty air and the promise of discovery that each dive held. An hour into their journey, they reached the designated research site. James cut the engine, allowing the boat to drift gently in the calm waters. The sun now hung high in the cloudless sky, its rays penetrating the crystal-clear water and revealing glimpses of the vibrant ecosystem below. As Sam prepared the monitoring equipment, James began to don his wetsuit. The familiar routine helped calm any lingering nerves from their earlier conversation. He had encountered sharks many times throughout his career, always maintaining a respectful distance. They were magnificent creatures, apex predators perfectly evolved for their environment. Fear, he believed, often stemmed from misunderstanding. "All right, Sam," James called out as he secured his oxygen tank. "I'll be down for about an hour. Keep an eye on the sonar, and radio me if you spot anything unusual." Sam nodded, his earlier concerns seemingly eased by the calm conditions and James's confidence. "Roger that, Doc. Good luck down there." With a final check of his equipment, James sat on the edge of the boat, mask in place and fins dangling over the water. He took a deep breath, centering himself for the dive ahead. "See you in a bit," he said with a grin, and then he was falling backward, plunging into the cool embrace of the Indian Ocean. The underwater world enveloped James, a realm of blue hues and shifting light. He allowed himself a moment to acclimate, floating just below the surface as he regulated his breathing and checked his buoyancy. Satisfied, he gave a thumbs up to Sam, visible on the boat above, and began his descent. As he sank deeper, the familiar excitement of exploration filled James. Schools of colorful fish darted around him, their scales glinting in the filtered sunlight. The coral formations below teemed with life, a testament to the health of this protected marine park. James methodically began his survey, documenting species populations and behavior patterns. He moved with the practiced ease of someone entirely in their element, his notepad filling with observations and data points. Time seemed to flow differently underwater, and James lost himself in his work. He was so engrossed that he almost missed the subtle shift in the environment around him. The schools of fish previously bustling with activity had begun to thin out. A stillness settled over the reef, an unusual quiet that pricked at James's finely tuned senses. He paused, hovering in the water column as he scanned his surroundings. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, something felt off. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, despite the insulation of his wetsuit. A shadow passed overhead, momentarily blocking out the sun. James's heart rate spiked, his mind immediately jumping to the warning Sam had shared earlier. He craned his neck, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever had caused the shadow. But the surface was too far above, the water distorting his view. Probably just a boat, James muttered to himself through his regulator, trying to quell the unease growing in his gut. Or a whale. Humpbacks migrate through here this time of year. Despite his attempts at rationalization, James couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He decided to cut his dive short, his scientific curiosity overtaken by a primal instinct for self-preservation. As he began his ascent, moving slowly to avoid decompression sickness, James kept a vigilant eye on his surroundings. The water seemed to have taken on a different quality, charged with a tension he couldn't quite explain. He was about halfway to the surface when he saw it, a massive shape gliding through the water at the edge of his vision. James's breath caught in his throat as the shape resolved itself into the unmistakable form of a great white shark. And not just any great white. This was the largest he had ever encountered in his long career. The shark moved with fluid grace, its powerful tail propelling it effortlessly through the water. It was at least 20 feet long, its girth speaking to years of successful hunting. The shark's black eye rolled towards James, ancient and inscrutable, assessing the strange creature in its domain. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. James floated, transfixed by the magnificent predator before him. Fear and awe warred within him, his scientific mind marveling at the rare opportunity to observe such a creature up close, while his survival instincts screamed at him to flee. The spell was broken as the shark slowly began to circle, its movements deliberate and purposeful. James's training kicked in and he forced himself to remain calm. Panicking now would only trigger the shark's predatory instincts. With measured movements, James reached for the radio attached to his dive belt. His fingers, usually so dexterous, now felt clumsy with adrenaline as he fumbled with the device. "Sam," he spoke as calmly as he could manage, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. "I'm going to need that pickup a little sooner than planned. We've got company down here. A big one." The radio crackled with Sam's response, concern evident in his voice. "Roger that, Doc. I'm on my way. I'm on my... How big are we talking?" James watched as the shark completed another lazy circle, drawing slightly closer. Its size became even more apparent, dwarfing James in comparison. "Biggest I've ever seen, Sam," James replied, his scientific mind automatically cataloging details even in the face of danger. "Female, at least 20 feet, possibly pregnant judging by her girth. She's circling but hasn't shown any aggressive behavior yet." "Hang tight, Doc." Sam's voice came through, tight with worry. "I'm coming to you. Whatever you do, don't make any sudden moves." As the shark began another circle, drawing ever closer, James realized with a sinking feeling that his dive, intended to be a routine data collection, had just become something far more dangerous. The true apex predator of these waters had arrived. and James was now acutely aware of his vulnerability in this alien environment. With the boat still out of sight, and the great white circles growing tighter, James knew that the real test was just beginning. His years of experience and knowledge would be put to the ultimate test in the next few minutes. As he watched the massive shark, a mix of fear and scientific fascination coursed through him. Little did he know, this encounter would change the course of his life forever. James Hartley's heart thundered in his chest as he watched the great white shark continue its ominous circling. The creature's massive form cut through the water with fluid grace, its dark eyes occasionally rolling towards him with predatory interest. Despite the immediate danger, the marine biologist in James couldn't help but marvel at the shark's beauty and power. "Stay calm," he muttered to himself through his regulator, the sound of his own voice oddly muffled in the underwater silence. "You've trained for this. You know these animals." Indeed, James had spent decades studying sharks, including great whites. He'd always advocated for their protection, arguing against the fear-mongering that often surrounded these apex predators. Now face to face with the largest specimen he'd ever encountered, James found his beliefs being put to the ultimate test. The shark, a female at least 20 feet long, continued to circle. Her girth suggested she might be pregnant, which could explain her unusually large size and potentially aggressive behavior. James knew that pregnant great whites were known to be more territorial and defensive. As he watched her, James's scientific mind kicked into overdrive, observing and analyzing even in the face of danger. Her skin was a beautiful slate gray color on top, fading to white underneath. Perfect camouflage for an ambush predator. Scars marred her flanks, telling the story of a long and violent life in the ocean. James's radio crackled to life, startling him. Sam's voice came through, tense with worry. "Doc, I've got the boat moving towards your last known position. How are you holding up?" Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, James brought the radio to his mouth. "Still here, Sam. She's curious but hasn't made any aggressive moves yet. I'm going to try to slowly ascend, see if I can—" His words were cut short as the shark suddenly changed direction, swimming directly towards him with frightening speed. James's breath caught in his throat as the massive predator bore down on him, her mouth slightly open, revealing rows of serrated teeth. At the last moment, the shark veered away, her rough skin brushing against James's leg as she passed. The close encounter sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system, and he had to fight the urge to panic and swim for the surface. "She's getting bolder, Sam," James reported, his voice shakier than he would have liked. "I need to get out of here soon." "I'm coming as fast as I can, Doc," Sam replied, the sound of the boat's engine revving in the background. "Just hang on." James knew he couldn't simply wait for rescue. He needed to take action to improve his chances of survival. Slowly, he began to ascend, keeping his movements smooth and controlled. The shark continued to circle, her patterns becoming increasingly erratic. As he rose through the water column, James's mind raced, recalling everything he knew about shark behavior. Great whites were known to be curious creatures, often investigating unfamiliar objects in their environment. But they were also apex predators, perfectly evolved killing machines. The shark's circling tightened, and James could see her muscles tensing beneath her sleek skin. He recognized the signs of pre-attack behavior, having studied it countless times in footage and scientific papers. But experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. "She's about to charge," James said into the radio, his voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through him. "If you can hear me, Sam, stay back. Don't put yourself in danger." The next few moments seemed to unfold in slow motion. The great white suddenly turned, her tail propelling her directly at James with incredible speed. He saw her eyes roll back protectively as she opened her enormous jaws, ready to test whether this strange creature in her domain was prey. Acting on instinct and years of training, James twisted in the water, bringing his dive knife up just as the shark reached him. He felt the rough sandpaper-like skin scrape against his wetsuit as the massive predator brushed past, her teeth snapping shut mere inches from his leg. The knife made contact, scoring a shallow cut along the shark's gills. It wasn't enough to seriously injure the animal, but the sudden pain caused her to veer off, circling away rapidly. James gasped, adrenaline surging through his veins. He'd narrowly avoided a potentially fatal bite, but he knew the danger was far from over. The taste of blood in the water, both his from small cuts sustained in the encounter and the shark's, would only serve to escalate the situation. "Sam!" he called urgently into the radio. "I've had to defend myself. There's blood in the water now. Things are going to get worse before they get better." "I can see you, Doc." Sam's voice came back, filled with a mix of relief and renewed worry. "You're about 50 meters off the port bow. I'm coming in now." James looked up, spotting the silhouette of the boat above him. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. The shark was already circling back, her movements more agitated than before. He began to swim towards the boat, fighting against the instinct to thrash and splash. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee, but James knew that rapid, erratic movements would only trigger the shark's predatory response more strongly. The great white charged again, faster this time. James barely had time to brace himself before she was upon him. He felt a searing pain in his calf as one of her teeth grazed him, tearing through his wetsuit and into flesh. James cried out, the sound muffled by his regulator. He lashed out with the knife again, catching the shark near her eye. She recoiled, shaking her massive head in irritation. Blood clouded the water around James, and he knew he was in serious trouble. The shark's behavior had shifted from curious investigation to active hunting. The scent of blood would drive her into a feeding frenzy, and James was the only prey in sight. "I'm hit!" he gasped into the radio. "Sam, be careful. She's in full attack mode now." Above, he could hear Sam shouting, though the words were indistinct. The boat's engine roared as it closed the distance. The shark circled once more, quicker this time, her body language telegraphing another imminent attack. James gripped his knife tightly, knowing it was a paltry defense against such a powerful predator. But it was all he had. As the great white charged again, James made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to dodge or defend, he swam directly at the shark. It was a counterintuitive move, one that went against every survival instinct. But it was based on years of research and understanding of shark behavior. The unexpected action seemed to confuse the shark momentarily. She veered off at the last second, her huge body brushing past James with enough force to spin him in the water. Taking advantage of the momentary reprieve, James kicked hard for the surface. His lungs burned, and his injured leg throbbed with each movement, but survival instinct pushed him onward. He broke the surface with a gasp, tearing off his mask and spitting out his regulator. "Sam!" he shouted, spotting the boat just meters away. "I see you, Doc. Hang on," Sam called back, maneuvering the vessel closer. James could feel the water churning beneath him as the shark circled. He knew she was preparing for another attack, probably the final one. In open water, with blood drawing her into a frenzy, the outcome was all but certain. Just as he felt the water surge beneath him, signaling the shark's approach, a strong hand grasped his arm. Sam, leaning dangerously far over the boat's edge, hauled with all his might. James scrambled onto the boat, his movements clumsy with exhaustion and pain. No sooner had he cleared the water than the massive form of the great white breached where he had been moments before, jaws snapping shut on empty air. "Go, go, go!" James shouted, and Sam didn't need to be told twice. He gunned the engine, the boat leaping forward and away from the enraged predator. As they sped toward shore, James collapsed on the deck, his body shaking with a mixture of adrenaline, pain, and delayed shock. He stared back at the churning water where the shark had been, his scientific mind already beginning to process the extraordinary encounter. "Are you okay, Doc?" Sam asked, his face pale with worry as he divided his attention between steering and checking on his mentor. James managed a weak nod, wincing as he examined the gash on his leg. It was bleeding, but not as badly as he had feared. "I'll live," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thanks to you, Sam. That was too close." As the adrenaline began to ebb, the reality of what had just occurred started to sink in. James had always respected sharks, advocated for their protection, and believed in the importance of understanding rather than fearing them. Now, he had experienced firsthand the awesome power and primal terror of a great white attack. "We need to document everything," James said, his researcher's instincts kicking in despite his ordeal. "That shark, She was extraordinary, largest I've ever seen. And her behavior, we need to understand why she was so aggressive. Sam looked at him incredulously. Doc, you nearly died out there. And you're worried about documenting the shark? James managed a weak smile. It's who I am, Sam. We're scientists. Every encounter, every data point matters. He paused, his expression growing serious. But I won't lie. This will take some processing. I've never been so terrified in my life. As they neared the shore, the gravity of the situation fully hit James. He had come face to face with nature in its rawest form, experienced the razor's edge between life and death. He knew that this encounter would change him, challenge his perceptions, and likely impact his work in ways he couldn't yet foresee. For now, though, as the coast of Shark Bay grew larger on the horizon, James was simply grateful to be alive. He had glimpsed the abyss, felt the primal fear that humans had experienced for millennia when facing the ocean's greatest predator. And somehow, against all odds, he had survived to tell the tale. The boat's hull scraped against the dock, and James could hear shouts of alarm from onlookers who had spotted his bloodied form. As Sam secured the vessel and people rushed to help, James closed his eyes for a moment. The image of that enormous shark, beautiful and terrifying, seared into his memory forever. This was only the beginning, he realized. The real challenge, processing this experience, integrating it into his understanding of these magnificent and deadly creatures, was yet to come. But for now, James Hartley, marine biologist and shark attack survivor, simply breathed in the salty air of Shark Bay, never more grateful for the solid ground beneath the boat and the gift of another day. The emergency room of Shark Bay Regional Hospital buzzed with frantic activity. Dr. James Hartley lay on a gurney, his leg throbbing with each beat of his heart. The fluorescent lights above seemed unnaturally bright, making him squint as medical staff rushed around him. Male, 55 years old, shark attack victim. A paramedic rattled off to the attending physician. Laceration to the right calf, approximately 20 centimeters long. Patient is alert and oriented. Dr. Sarah Chen, the ER attending, leaned over. Her dark eyes were sharp and focused. Dr. Hartley, I'm Dr. Chen. Can you tell me how you're feeling? James managed a weak smile. Like I just went 10 rounds with the ocean's perfect predator and barely scraped by. Dr. Chen's lips twitched in a brief smile. Well, your sense of humor is intact. That's a good sign. We're going to take good care of you, Dr. Hartley. As the medical team worked to clean and assess his wound, James found his mind drifting back to the encounter. The image of the massive great white, her black eye rolling towards him as she charged, was seared into his memory. Dr. Hartley? Dr. Chen's voice snapped him back to reality. Your wound is deep, but thankfully the shark's tooth missed any major arteries. You're going to need surgery to repair some of the muscle damage and will want to watch for infection. James nodded, wincing as a nurse inserted an IV into his arm. What about nerve damage? Will I be able to dive again? Dr. Chen's expression softened. It's too early to say for certain, but the preliminary assessment is positive. With proper treatment and physical therapy, you should regain full function. As for diving, that's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it. As they prepared him for surgery, James heard a commotion outside his room. A familiar voice was arguing with the hospital staff. I'm his research assistant. I was there when it happened. Please, I need to see him. Sam, James called out, his voice stronger than he expected. It's okay. Let him in. Sam burst into the room, his face pale and drawn. He looked from James to the medical staff, his eyes wide with concern. Doc, God, I'm so sorry. I should have been faster. James cut him off. Sam, stop. You saved my life out there. If you hadn't pulled me out when you did. He left the sentence unfinished, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Sam swallowed hard, nodding. The local authorities are already asking questions. The attack, it's all over the news. What do you want me to tell them? James sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew this was coming. A shark attack, especially one involving a prominent marine biologist, was bound to cause a stir. Tell them the truth, Sam. It was an encounter with a remarkable animal. Probably the largest great white ever recorded in these waters. But make it clear, this wasn't an act of malice. The shark was behaving naturally in its environment. We were the intruders. But Doc, Sam protested, you almost died out there. People are going to want action. There's already talk of culls, of putting up more nets. No, James said firmly, his eyes snapping open. Absolutely not. We can't let fear drive policy. These animals are crucial to the marine ecosystem. They've been demonized enough. Dr. Chen, who had been listening to the exchange, stepped in. I'm sorry, but we need to get Dr. Hartley to surgery now. You can continue this discussion later. As they began to wheel him out, James grabbed Sam's arm. Promise me, Sam, no matter what happens, you'll advocate for the sharks, even if I don't make it through this. Sam's eyes widened in alarm. Don't talk like that, Doc. You're going to be fine. James managed a weak chuckle. Of course I am, but promise me anyway. Sam nodded solemnly. I promise, Doc. I'll make sure your work continues. As they rolled him towards the operating room, James felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Fear, certainly. The memory of those rows of razor-sharp teeth was still fresh, but also a sense of wonder and respect for the magnificent creature he'd encountered. And underneath it all, a growing determination. This experience, terrifying as it was, could be a powerful tool for education and conservation. The anesthesiologist placed a mask over James's face. Count backward from 10, Dr. Hartley. As James began to count, his last conscious thought was of the shark, gliding gracefully back into the depths of Shark Bay. James awoke to the steady beep of a heart monitor. His mouth felt dry and there was a dull ache in his leg. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light of the hospital room, he realized it was night. How long had he been out? A figure stirred in the chair beside his bed. Doc, you awake? Sam leaned forward, relief evident on his face. Thank God. How are you feeling? James took a moment to assess himself. Like I've been chewed up and spit out by a... Oh, wait. He managed a weak smile. Sam didn't return the smile. Doc, we need to talk. Things have escalated while you were in surgery. James felt a knot form in his stomach. What do you mean? Sam ran a hand through his hair, a gesture James recognized as a sign of stress. The media got hold of the story. It's all over the news. Renowned shark expert attacked in Shark Bay. The local authorities are under pressure to do something. There's talk of a shark cull, of closing the beaches. James tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his leg. No, absolutely not. We can't let them do that. It's an overreaction based on fear, not science. I know, Doc. I've been trying to tell them that, but they're not listening to me. They want to hear from you. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a police uniform entered, followed by a woman in a crisp business suit. Dr. Hartley, the man said. I'm Chief Inspector Roberts. This is Ms. Elaine Perkins from the Department of Fisheries. We need to talk about the incident. James straightened up as best he could, ignoring the pain. He knew this conversation could be crucial for the future of shark conservation in Shark Bay. Of course, Inspector, Ms. Perkins, I assume you're here about the attack. Ms. Perkins stepped forward, her expression grave. Dr. Hartley, we need your official statement on what happened. And we need your recommendation on how to proceed. The public is demanding action. James took a deep breath. This was his chance to shape the narrative, to turn this traumatic experience into something positive for shark conservation. What happened was not an attack, Ms. Perkins. It was an encounter. A natural predator was investigating an unfamiliar object in its territory. Yes, it escalated to aggression, but that's the risk we take when we enter their world. Chief Inspector Roberts frowned. Dr. Hartley, with all due respect, you nearly died out there. How can you defend the animal that did this to you? James met the inspector's gaze steadily. Because I understand it, Inspector. That shark wasn't acting out of malice. It was simply being what millions of years of evolution have shaped it to be, an apex predator. The ocean is its home, not ours. We're the visitors. Ms. Perkins leaned forward, her voice urgent. But Dr. Hartley, we can't simply do nothing. The tourism industry is already seeing cancellations. People are afraid. Then we educate them, James said firmly. We use this incident as a catalyst for better understanding, not fear-mongering. Instead of culls and nets, which harm marine ecosystems, we invest in research. We develop better early warning systems, improve our understanding of shark behavior. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What I experienced out there was terrifying, yes, but it was also awe-inspiring. That shark was the largest great white I've ever encountered, possibly pregnant. Killing her wouldn't just be ecologically irresponsible, it would be a tragic loss for science. Chief Inspector Roberts shook his head. It's not that simple, Doctor. The public wants assurances of safety. Then we give them real assurances, not false ones, James countered. Shark culls don't work. They disrupt marine ecosystems and give people a false sense of security. Instead, we can implement a tagging and monitoring program. Use drones for beach surveillance. Educate the public on shark behavior and how to minimize risks. Ms. Perkins looked thoughtful. That could work, but it would require funding, public support. James nodded eagerly, ignoring the twinge of pain the movement caused. Exactly. And that's where this incident can help. My encounter can be a powerful tool for education. I'm willing to speak publicly, to share my experience, not to spread fear, but to foster understanding and respect for these incredible animals. There was a moment of silence as Inspector Roberts and Ms. Perkins exchanged glances. Finally, Ms. Perkins spoke. It's an unconventional approach, Dr. Hartley, but given your expertise and your unique perspective as a survivor, it could be effective. Inspector Roberts nodded slowly. I can't promise anything, but I'll bring your recommendations to the council. Your willingness to speak out after what you've been through, it carries weight. As they left the room, Sam turned to James, a mix of admiration and concern on his face. Doc, are you sure about this? Going public, becoming the face of this issue. It's going to be intense. James leaned back against his pillows, suddenly feeling the full weight of his exhaustion. But underneath the fatigue, there was a burning determination. I'm sure, Sam, this encounter, it's changed me, but not in the way people might expect. I respect these animals more than ever now, and I'll be damned if I let fear and ignorance drive them to extinction. He looked out the window, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break over Shark Bay. Somewhere out there, that massive great white was still swimming, an essential part of an ecosystem humans were only beginning to understand. We've got work to do, Sam, James said softly. Important work. As the sun rose over Shark Bay, casting a golden glow across the water, Dr. James Hartley, shark attack survivor and newly minted conservation advocate, began to plan his next move in the fight to protect the ocean's most misunderstood predators. 6 weeks after the attack, Dr. James Hartley stood at the edge of the beach, his cane sinking slightly into the sand. The sound of waves lapping at the shore filled his ears, a sound that once brought him comfort but now sent a shiver down his spine. He took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs, and forced himself to look out at the vast expanse of Shark Bay. You don't have to do this today, Doc, Sam said, standing beside him with a concerned expression. Nobody would blame you if you needed more time. James tightened his grip on the cane, his knuckles turning white. No, Sam. It has to be today. The press conference is tomorrow, and I need to face this fear head-on before I can stand in front of those cameras. He took a tentative step forward, wincing slightly as his injured leg protested. The physical therapy had been grueling, but he was making progress. The psychological scars, however, were proving harder to overcome. As they slowly made their way down to the water's edge, James couldn't help but replay the attack in his mind. The memory of the great white's massive form charging towards him, its black eye rolling back as its jaws opened wide, was still vivid and terrifying. Talk me through it again, Sam, James said, his voice tight. What we know about her. Sam nodded, understanding his mentor's need to approach this scientifically, to try and rationalize the experience. Based on your description and the data we've gathered, she's likely the largest great white ever recorded in Shark Bay. Estimated length of 20 feet, which is extraordinary. Her girth suggests she might be pregnant, which could explain her aggressive behavior. James nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. And the tracking? We've picked up her signal a few times since the attack, Sam continued. She seems to be staying within her usual territory about 10 miles offshore. The tagging program you proposed is already yielding valuable data. They reached the water's edge, small waves lapping at their feet. James felt his heart rate increase, his palms growing sweaty. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to take deep, calming breaths. "You okay, Doc?" Sam asked, putting a steadying hand on James's shoulder. James nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. When he finally spoke, his words were barely above a whisper. "I've spent my entire career advocating for these animals, Sam. Telling people they're not mindless killing machines, that attacks on humans are rare, and usually cases of mistaken identity. And now you've experienced firsthand just how powerful and terrifying they can be." Sam finished for him. "It's okay to be scared, Doc. It's human." James opened his eyes. James, looking out at the deceptively calm waters. "But I can't let that fear control me, or cloud my judgment. These animals are essential to the ecosystem. They're apex predators that have existed for millions of years, perfectly evolved for their environment. One traumatic encounter doesn't change that." As if on cue, a dark shape broke the surface about 100 yards out. Both men tensed instinctively, but it was just a dolphin, its dorsal fin briefly visible before it disappeared beneath the waves. James let out a shaky laugh. "Well, at least my survival instincts are intact." Sam grinned, relieved to see a glimpse of his mentor's usual humor. "So, what's the game plan for tomorrow's press conference?" James's expression grew serious again. "We need to control the narrative, Sam. This can't become another excuse for fear-mongering and culls. We use this as an opportunity to educate, to push for more research funding, better conservation measures." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'll share my experience, yes, people need to understand the reality of these encounters. But I'll also emphasize the rarity of attacks, the importance of sharks to marine ecosystems, and the non-lethal measures we can take to improve beach safety." Sam nodded approvingly. "Sounds good, Doc. But are you sure you're ready for the media circus? It's going to be intense." James squared his shoulders, a determined look in his eyes. "I have to be, Sam. The future of shark conservation in this area could depend on how we handle this. We can't let fear and sensationalism drive policy." As they stood there, the sun beginning to set over Shark Bay, casting a golden glow across the water, James felt a mixture of emotions wash over him. Fear was still there, a primal response he knew would take time to fully overcome. But there was also a sense of purpose, a renewed dedication to his life's work. "You know," James said softly, "in all my years of studying sharks, I never truly understood the terror they can inspire. Now that I've experienced it, I think I can be a more effective advocate. I can speak to both the fear and the fascination." Sam smiled. "That's the Doc I know. Taking a terrifying experience and turning it into a teaching opportunity." Just then, James's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, frowning at the screen. "It's Dr. Chen from the hospital. She wants me to come in for some additional tests before the press conference tomorrow." "Everything okay?" Sam asked, concern evident in his voice. James shrugged. "Probably just being cautious. You know how doctors are." He managed a wry smile. Present company excluded, of course. As they made their way back up the beach, James paused for one last look at the ocean. The sun was now a fiery orange ball sinking into the sea, its reflection creating a glowing path across the water. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured. Sam nodded. Hard to believe something so peaceful could be so dangerous. James turned to his assistant, his expression serious. "That's exactly the message we need to convey, Sam. The ocean, like the sharks that inhabit it, demands our respect, not our fear. We can admire its beauty while acknowledging its dangers. It's about finding a balance." As they reached the parking lot, James leaned heavily on his cane, the walk having taken more out of him than he cared to admit. "Let's head to the hospital. I want to make sure I'm in top form for tomorrow." The drive to Shark Bay Regional Hospital was quiet, both men lost in their thoughts. For James, the impending press conference loomed large. He knew his words could shape public opinion, influence policy decisions. The weight of that responsibility was daunting. At the hospital, Dr. Chen was waiting for them, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Hartley, thank you for coming in on such short notice." James nodded, trying to read her face. "Of course. Is everything all right?" Dr. Chen hesitated for a moment. "Let's talk in my office." As they followed her down the sterile hospital corridor, James felt a knot forming in his stomach. Something was off. He could sense it. In her office, Dr. Chen gestured for them to sit. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Dr. Hartley, in preparation for your public appearance tomorrow, we ran some additional tests. Standard procedure, really. But we found something." James felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean, something?" Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "The bite you sustained, it seems the shark's tooth left behind some debris. Microscopic fragments that our initial examinations missed. These fragments have been causing a low-grade infection." Sam leaned forward, his face pale. "Is it serious?" Dr. Chen held up a reassuring hand. "We caught it early. With proper treatment, there should be no lasting effects. But," she paused, looking directly at James, "I'm afraid I can't clear you for diving. Not for the foreseeable future." The words hit James like a physical blow. Diving was more than his profession. It was his passion, his connection to the underwater world he'd dedicated his life to studying. The thought of being landlocked, unable to immerse himself in the environment he loved, was devastating. How long?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen shook her head. "It's hard to say. Months, certainly, possibly longer. We need to aggressively treat the infection and then reassess." "I'm sorry, Dr. Hartley. I know how much diving means to you." James sat back, feeling as if the wind had been knocked out of him. The press conference, the conservation efforts, his entire career, suddenly it all seemed insurmountable. Sam, sensing his mentor's distress, spoke up. "What about the press conference tomorrow? Should we postpone?" James shook his head, a steely determination replacing the shock in his eyes. "No, this doesn't change anything. In fact, it makes our message even more important." He looked at Dr. Chen. "Can I count on you to be there tomorrow? To explain the medical aspects of shark bites, the importance of proper treatment and follow-up?" Dr. Chen nodded, a small smile on her face. "Of course, Dr. Hartley. I'd be honored." As they left the hospital, the sun had long since set, leaving Shark Bay bathed in moonlight. James paused at the entrance, looking out at the silvery path the moon cast across the water in the distance. "You know, Sam," he said softly, "I always told my students that to truly understand marine life, you have to be willing to get out of the boat to immerse yourself in their world. Now I have to find a new way to connect, to study, to advocate." Sam put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out, Doc. Together. This is just another challenge to overcome." James nodded, his resolve strengthening. Tomorrow he would face the cameras, share his story, and fight for the creatures that had simultaneously terrified and fascinated him. He would speak for the sharks, for the ocean, and for all those who sought to understand rather than destroy. As they drove home through the quiet streets of Shark Bay, James Hartley, marine biologist, shark attack survivor, and now unwilling land dweller, began to formulate a new approach to his life's work. The ocean might be off limits for now, but his voice, his experience, and his dedication to marine conservation were more powerful than ever. The great white that had nearly taken his life had also given him a new purpose. And tomorrow, the world would hear his story. The press conference room at the Shark Bay Marine Research Center buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from local and national media outlets jostled for position, cameras at the ready. At the back of the room, a large screen displayed a live feed of the bay, a constant reminder of the vast, mysterious world just beyond the shore. Dr. James Hartley stood behind the curtain, his hands gripping his cane tightly. Despite his years of public speaking experience, he felt a nervous energy coursing through him. This wasn't just another lecture or presentation. Today he would bare his soul, sharing a traumatic experience in hopes of changing hearts and minds. Sam appeared at his side, offering a reassuring smile. "You've got this, Doc. Remember, you're the expert here." James nodded, taking a deep breath. Let's hope expertise is enough to combat fear and sensationalism. As they stepped onto the small stage, camera flashes erupted, momentarily blinding James. He blinked, adjusting to the harsh light, and made his way to the podium. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm Dr. James Hartley, marine biologist and recent shark attack survivor." A murmur rippled through the crowd. James paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "6 weeks ago, I came face to face with what I estimate to be the largest great white shark ever recorded in Shark Bay. It was an encounter that nearly cost me my life, and one that has profoundly changed me, but not in the way you might expect." He gestured to his leg, still visibly bandaged beneath his trousers. "Yes, I bear the physical scars of this encounter, and yes, I still wake up some nights, heart racing, reliving those terrifying moments. But I stand before you today not as a victim seeking retribution, but as a scientist with a renewed sense of purpose." James paused, his eyes scanning the room. He could see the mix of emotions on the faces before him: curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. "I know many of you are expecting me to call for culls, for increased netting, for any measure that might make us feel safer in the short term. But I'm here to tell you that these knee-jerk reactions are not the answer. They're not based on science, and they do more harm than good." A hand shot up from the crowd. "Dr. Hartley, John Simmons, Perth Now, how can you defend these animals after what happened to you? Don't you think public safety should be our primary concern?" James met the reporter's gaze steadily. "Mr. Simmons, I understand your concern. But let me ask you this: do we abandon our highways every time there's a car accident? Do we stop building homes because of the risk of house fires? No. We study the risks, we educate ourselves, and we take measured precautions." He gestured to the screen behind him, where the calm waters of Shark Bay shimmered. "The ocean is not our domain. When we enter it, we are visitors in a world that has existed for millions of years before us. The shark that bit me wasn't acting out of malice or aggression. It was simply being what nature has shaped it to be over countless generations, an apex predator in its natural habitat." Another reporter stood up. Sarah Chen, ABC News. "Dr. Hartley, there are reports that you've been advised against diving in the future due to complications from your injury. How will this affect your research and your stance on shark conservation?" James felt a lump form in his throat. This was the part he'd been dreading. "You're correct, Ms. Chen. Due to a lingering infection from the bite, I've been advised to avoid diving for the foreseeable future." A buzz of conversation filled the room. James raised his hand, calling for silence. "But let me be clear. This setback has only strengthened my resolve. If anything, it's given me a unique perspective. I now understand on a visceral level the fear that drives so much of our policy around sharks. But I also understand that this fear, if left unchecked, can lead to disastrous consequences for our marine ecosystems." He took a moment to collect his thoughts, then continued. "We're at a crossroads. Climate change, overfishing, and habitat destruction are already putting immense pressure on our oceans. Sharks, as apex predators, play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of marine ecosystems. If we allow fear to drive our actions, if we resort to culls and nets, we risk destabilizing these already fragile environments." A voice called out from the back of the room. "So what's your solution, Doc? Just let these man-eaters roam free while we cower on the beach?" James could feel the tension in the room rising. This was the crux of the matter, the fear he needed to address head-on. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but let's look at the facts. Shark attacks, while terrifying, are incredibly rare. You're more likely to be killed by a falling coconut or a vending machine than by a shark. What we need is not more nets or culls, but better education and smarter preventative measures." He gestured to Sam, who stepped forward with a laptop. "My team and I have been working on a comprehensive plan. It involves increased drone surveillance of popular beaches, real-time tracking of tagged sharks, and a public education campaign to help people understand shark behavior and how to minimize risks." As Sam pulled up the presentation on the big screen, James continued. "We're also proposing increased funding for research into shark deterrent technologies that don't harm the animals or disrupt the ecosystem. Things like electromagnetic barriers and acoustic devices that can create a safe zone for swimmers without killing indiscriminately. For the next hour, James fielded questions, addressing concerns, and passionately arguing for a more balanced approach to shark management. As the press conference wound down, he could sense a shift in the room. The initial hostility had given way to a more thoughtful, nuanced discussion. As the last question was answered and the cameras began to power down, James felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He leaned heavily on his cane, the strain of standing for so long taking its toll. Sam was at his side in an instant. "You did it, Doc. You knocked it out of the park." James managed a tired smile. "Let's hope it makes a difference." As they made their way off the stage, a young woman approached them. She couldn't have been more than 20 with bright eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Dr. Hartley, I'm Emma, a marine biology student at Murdoch University. I wanted to thank you. Your work has always been an inspiration to me, but after today, well, you've shown us what true dedication to science and conservation looks like." James felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know." As Emma walked away, Sam turned to James with a grin. "See? You're making a difference already." James nodded, his eyes following the young student as she left. "It's a start, but we've got a long road ahead of us." Later that evening, James stood on the balcony of his beachfront home, looking out over Shark Bay. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In the distance, he could see the dorsal fins of a pod of dolphins breaking the surface. Sam joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "Penny for your thoughts, Doc?" James took a sip, savoring the warmth. "I was just thinking about her, Sam. The shark. Wondering where she is, what she's doing." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Most people would be hoping she's far away." James shook his head. "No, I hope she's out there, doing what nature designed her to do, keeping the ecosystem in balance, passing on her genes to the next generation of great whites." He turned to Sam, a fierce determination in his eyes. "We've got work to do, my friend. Today was just the beginning. We need to change the narrative, help people see these animals for what they really are. Not monsters, but marvels of evolution, essential components of a healthy ocean." Sam nodded, raising his own cup in a toast. "To changing the narrative, then. And to the sharks, may they continue to swim free, misunderstood but magnificent." As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beneath the horizon, James Hartley felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would be challenging, fraught with opposition and setbacks, but he was ready for the fight. He had stared into the abyss, felt the primal fear that had driven human-shark interactions for centuries, and he had emerged not broken, but transformed. The great white had taken his ability to dive, but it had given him something far more powerful. A new purpose, a new voice. And he intended to use it not just for the sharks, but for all the creatures of the deep, and for the vast, mysterious realm they called home. As night fell over Shark Bay, somewhere out in the darkness, a massive shadow glided through the water, powerful and graceful. The shark, oblivious to the turmoil she had caused, continued her ancient patrol, a living reminder of the wild, untamed nature of the sea. And on the shore, a man who had faced her and lived prepared for a new chapter in his lifelong mission to bridge the gap between two worlds, the human and the marine, the known and the unknown, the feared and the revered. 3 months had passed since Dr. James Hartley's impassioned press conference. The sun rose over Shark Bay, casting a warm glow across the water as James stood on the beach, his cane sinking slightly into the sand. The waves lapped gently at the shore, a sound that once filled him with joy but now carried a complex mix of emotions: respect, fear, and an unwavering determination. Sam approached, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Morning, Doc. Thought you could use this." James accepted the mug gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "Thanks, Sam. Any news on our proposal?" Sam's face broke into a wide grin. "That's actually why I came to find you. We just got word from the Department of Fisheries. They've approved our pilot program." James's eyes widened, a surge of excitement coursing through him. "The full program? Drones, tagging, education, all of it?" Sam nodded enthusiastically. Every last bit. They were particularly impressed with your educational outreach plan. Seems like your press conference made quite an impact. James let out a long breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It had been a grueling few months of lobbying, writing proposals, and fighting against deeply ingrained fears and misconceptions. But finally, they had a chance to make a real difference. This is fantastic news, Sam. When can we start? They want to launch next month to coincide with the start of the summer season. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. James nodded, his mind already racing with plans and possibilities. Let's head to the lab. We need to start coordinating with the local surf clubs, fisheries officers, and schools. As they made their way off the beach, a young lifeguard jogged up to them. Dr. Hartley, I heard the news about your program. Is it true you're going to be training us on shark behavior? James smiled at the young man's enthusiasm. That's right, Tim. We want every lifeguard on this coast to be an expert in shark ecology and behavior. You're our first line of defense in keeping both people and sharks safe. Tim's chest swelled with pride. That's awesome, Doc. After hearing you speak at the town hall meeting last month, I've been reading everything I can about great whites. Did you know they can detect 1 drop of blood in 100 liters of water? James chuckled, patting Tim on the shoulder. Keep up that enthusiasm, Tim. We're going to need it. As they continued towards the research center, James marveled at how much had changed in just a few months. The initial fear and anger following his attack had gradually given way to curiosity and a desire for understanding. It wasn't universal. There were still those who called for culls and nets. But the tide of public opinion was slowly turning. At the research center, the team gathered for a briefing. Maps of Shark Bay covered the walls, dotted with colored pins representing recent shark sightings and proposed drone patrol routes. James addressed the room, his voice filled with purpose. All right, team, we've got the green light. Now the real work begins. Sarah, I want you leading the drone program. Work with the local surf clubs to set up a training schedule. Michael, you're on tag and track. I want real-time updates on every tagged shark in the bay. He turned to Sam. Sam, you'll be heading up our education program. I want you in every school in the region, from primary to university. Let's make Shark Bay the most shark-aware community in Australia. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Dr. Lisa Chen, a marine ecologist who had recently joined the project, approached James. Dr. Hartley, I've been analyzing the data from our recent surveys. There's something I think you should see. She pulled up a series of charts on her tablet. We're seeing a significant increase in great white activity in the northern part of the bay. It's unusual for this time of year. James frowned, studying the data. Any theories? Lisa nodded, swiping to a new screen. Water temperatures are slightly higher than average, and we're seeing changes in the distribution of seal populations. I think the sharks are following their food source. James stroked his chin thoughtfully. This could complicate our management plans. We'll need to adjust our drone routes and increase public awareness in that area. Just then, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his eyebrows raising in surprise. It's the Minister for Fisheries. He wants to meet. An hour later, James found himself in a sleek government office in Perth, facing Minister David Thompson across a polished mahogany desk. Dr. Hartley, the minister began, his tone serious. I'll cut to the chase. Your program has stirred up quite a bit of controversy. There's pressure from certain quarters to take a more aggressive approach to shark management. James felt his jaw tighten. Minister, with all due respect, culls and nets are not the answer. They're ecologically disastrous and give people a false sense of security. The minister held up a hand. I'm not disagreeing with you, doctor, but I need to be able to tell the public we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. Your educational programs are all well and good, but people want action they can see. James leaned forward, his voice intense. Then let's give them that, Minister. Drones patrolling the beaches, real-time alerts on shark movements, lifeguards trained in the latest shark deterrent techniques. That's visible action that doesn't harm the ecosystem. He paused, then continued. And Minister, think of the economic potential. Shark Bay could become a world leader in sustainable shark tourism. People coming not to fear sharks, but to understand and appreciate them. The minister sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. You paint an intriguing picture, Dr. Hartley. But can you deliver on these promises? James met his gaze steadily. Give us 6 months. If we can't show a measurable increase in beach safety and public education, along with stable or increasing shark populations, I'll resign and support whatever alternative measures you deem necessary. The minister's eyebrows shot up. That's quite a gamble, Doctor. James nodded solemnly. These animals are worth it, Minister. And I believe the people of Shark Bay are smart enough to embrace a solution that protects both humans and sharks. After a long moment, the minister extended his hand. 6 months, Dr. Hartley, don't make me regret this. As James left the office, he felt a mix of elation and trepidation. They had their chance, but the stakes couldn't be higher. Back in Shark Bay, the next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Drones buzzed over beaches, their operators trained to spot not just sharks, but also signs of marine distress that might attract them. Local schools echoed with the excited voices of children learning about shark anatomy and behavior. Fishermen and surfers attended workshops on how to minimize their risk of encounters. One sunny afternoon, James stood on the deck of a research vessel, watching as his team carefully fitted a satellite tag to a young great white. The shark, a female about 12 feet long, thrashed in the cradle alongside the boat. "Easy, girl," James murmured, more to himself than the shark. "We're almost done." As they lowered the shark back into the water, James felt a familiar mix of awe and trepidation. This was the closest he'd been to a great white since his attack. His leg ached with phantom pain, a reminder of the power these creatures possessed. The shark's tail churned the water as it swam away, its new tag blinking steadily. James turned to his team, a smile breaking across his face. "Beautiful work, everyone. Let's see where she takes us." But not everyone shared James's enthusiasm for the new approach. As he walked along the main street of Shark Bay a few days later, he overheard a heated conversation outside the local pub. "It's all well and good for that scientist to tell us to live and let live," a gruff voice was saying. "He's not the one who lost his son to one of those monsters." James paused, recognizing the speaker as Tom Riley, a local fisherman who had lost his son to a shark attack 5 years earlier. The tragedy had been a turning point for the community, leading to calls for harsher measures against sharks. Taking a deep breath, James approached the group. "Mr. Riley?" "I couldn't help overhearing. I wonder if we could talk." Tom turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized James. "What's there to talk about, Doc? You gonna tell me how misunderstood these killers are?" James shook his head solemnly. "No, Mr. Riley. I wouldn't presume to tell you anything about your loss, but I would like to show you something, if you're willing." Tom hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "All right, Doc. Show me what you've got." The next morning, James and Tom stood on the beach, watching as a drone took off over the water. On a tablet in James's hands, they could see a real-time feed of the ocean below. "There," James said, pointing to a dark shape moving through the water. "That's one of our tagged great whites. Female, about 15 feet long." Tom watched, his expression a mix of fear and fascination. "She's so close to the shore." James nodded. "They often are. But watch this." He tapped the screen and a series of alerts popped up. Lifeguards on the beach began ushering swimmers out of the water. Within minutes, the beach was clear. "In the old days, we might not have known she was there until it was too late," James explained. "Now we can coexist safely. We're not removing the sharks, Mr. Riley. We're learning to share their home responsibly." Tom was quiet for a long moment, watching as the shark glided peacefully through the water, unaware of the commotion it had caused on shore. "It won't bring my boy back," he said finally, his voice gruff with emotion. James placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "No, it won't. But it might prevent other families from experiencing your loss." As the weeks turned into months, James saw a gradual shift in the community. Beach closures due to shark sightings, once met with fear and anger, were now accepted as a normal part of coastal life. Children proudly showed off their shark knowledge, educating their parents on the different species found in the bay. The true test came on a sunny Saturday in the peak of summer. A 16-foot great white, one of the largest ever recorded in the bay, was spotted near a popular surfing beach. In the past, such a sighting would have caused panic. But now, the well-oiled machine of James's program sprang into action. Drones tracked the shark's movement. Lifeguards calmly evacuated the water. Real-time updates were sent to an app on every beachgoer's phone. And most importantly, no one called for the shark to be killed. They simply waited for it to move on, respecting its right to inhabit its natural environment. As James watched the situation unfold from the control center, he felt a surge of pride and hope. They were doing it. They were finding a way for humans and sharks to coexist. That evening, as the sun set over Shark Bay, James stood on his balcony, looking out over the water. The door opened behind him, and he turned to see Sam joining him. "Quite a day, huh, Doc?" Sam said, handing James a cold beer. James nodded, taking a long sip. "It's a start, Sam. A real start." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the waves. "You know," James said finally, "when that shark attacked me, I thought my work here was over. I thought I'd never be able to look at the ocean the same way again." He turned to Sam, a fierce light in his eyes. "But now I realize that attack gave me a gift. It gave me a new perspective, a new way to bridge the gap between humans and sharks. We're not just protecting people, Sam. We're protecting an entire ecosystem, an ancient species that has far more right to these waters than we do." Sam raised his bottle in a toast. "To peaceful coexistence, Doc." James clinked his bottle against Sam's. "To peaceful coexistence. And to the mysteries of the deep that we're only just beginning to understand." As night fell over Shark Bay, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was still long, the work far from over. But for the first time since his attack, he felt truly hopeful. Humans and sharks, learning to share the vast blue world. It was possible. They were proving it, day by day, in the shimmering waters of Shark Bay. The research vessel, Carcharodon, cut through the early morning mist hanging over Shark Bay. Dr. James Hartley stood at the bow, his silver hair ruffled by the salty breeze. Despite the chill in the air, a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Today was a day he'd both anticipated and dreaded for months. "Doc, we're approaching the coordinates," Sam called from the helm. "Sonar's picking up some sizable signatures." James nodded, his grip tightening on the railing. "Bring us in slow, Sam. Let's not startle our friends down there." As Sam maneuvered the boat into position, the rest of the team bustled about, preparing equipment. Dr. Lisa Chen approached James, concern etched on her face. "James, are you sure about this? It's only been 8 months since—" "Well, you know." James managed a tight smile. "I appreciate your concern, Lisa, but I need to do this. We can't ask the public to trust our research if I'm not willing to get back in the water myself." Lisa nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful down there, okay? Remember, you've got nothing to prove." But James knew that wasn't entirely true. This dive was about more than data collection. It was about facing his fears, about proving to himself that he could still do the work he loved. As the team helped him into his wetsuit, James couldn't help but notice how his hands shook slightly. The memory of his last encounter with a great white was still vivid. The massive jaws, the primal terror, the searing pain in his leg. He took a deep breath, forcing the images from his mind. Sam approached, holding out a small device. "Here's the new Shark Shield, Doc. Latest model. Should give you an extra layer of protection down there." James attached the device to his ankle, trying to draw comfort from the blinking LED. "Thanks, Sam. Remember, if anything goes wrong, we'll have you out of there before you can say shark biscuit," Sam finished with a grin, though his eyes betrayed his own nervousness. With a final check of his equipment, James moved to the stern of the boat where the dive platform was set up. He sat on the edge, fins dangling in the water, and took a moment to survey the scene. The sun was now burning off the last wisps of morning mist, revealing the vast expanse of Shark Bay stretching out before him. Somewhere beneath those deceptively calm waters, the subjects of their study were waiting. "All right, team," James said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Let's make this count." With that, he pushed off, plunging into the cool embrace of the Indian Ocean. The initial shock of the water helped clear James's mind, his training kicking in as he regulated his breathing and checked his buoyancy. Slowly, he began his descent, the familiar thrill of exploration starting to override his lingering fear. At 30 feet, the first shark appeared. It was a bronze whaler, about 10 feet long, circling curiously, but keeping its distance. James felt his heart rate spike but forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't the species that had attacked him, and its behavior was non-threatening. "Bronze whaler sighted," he reported into his comm unit. "Female, approximately 3 meters. Behavior normal." As he continued his descent, more sharks came into view. A school of smaller reef sharks darted past, seemingly uninterested in the human intruder. Then, emerging from the blue haze below, James saw it, the unmistakable silhouette of a great white. For a moment, he froze, the memory of his attack crashing over him like a wave. His breathing quickened, and he felt the urge to rocket to the surface. But he forced himself to stay put, to observe. The great white was smaller than the one that had attacked him, probably a young male about 12 feet long. It moved with fluid grace, its black eye rolling towards James as it passed. Despite his fear, James couldn't help but marvel at the creature's beauty. "Great white sighted," he reported, proud of how steady his voice sounded. "Male, approximately 4 meters. No aggressive behavior noted." For the next hour, James methodically collected data, observing shark behavior patterns and taking water samples. With each passing minute, he felt more of his old confidence returning. The sharks, for their part, seemed to accept his presence, occasionally approaching to investigate but never showing signs of aggression. As he prepared to ascend, movement caught his eye. A much larger shape was emerging from the depths. James's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the massive form of a female great white, easily 18 feet long. "Second great white sighted," he reported, unable to keep a tremor from his voice. "Female, at least 5.5 meters, possibly pregnant." The huge shark circled slowly, its movements deliberate and purposeful. James knew he should begin his ascent but found himself transfixed by the magnificent predator before him. This was why he had become a marine biologist, to witness moments like this. Suddenly, the shark changed direction, swimming directly towards James. He felt his heart hammering in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to flee. But he held his position, trusting in his equipment and his knowledge of shark behavior. The great white passed within feet of James, close enough for him to see the scars that marked its flanks, to feel the displacement of water as its powerful tail propelled it through the ocean. For a brief moment, their eyes met, ancient predator and modern intruder, two beings sharing a world but separated by millions of years of evolution. And then it was gone, continuing its patrol of its underwater domain. James let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, a mix of terror and exhilaration coursing through him. "James? James, do you copy?" Sam's worried voice crackled through the comm unit. Your heart rate spiked. "Everything okay down there?" James took a moment to compose himself before responding. "I'm all right, Sam. Just had a close encounter with our largest lady. She's incredible." As he began his ascent, James felt a profound shift within himself. The fear was still there, a healthy respect for the power of these animals, but it no longer paralyzed him. He had faced his demons and come out the other side with a renewed sense of purpose. Back on the boat, the team helped James out of his gear, peppering him with questions about his observations. But James found himself uncharacteristically quiet, still processing the experience. It wasn't until later that evening, as they were reviewing the day's data, that James finally opened up. The team had gathered in the ship's small common area, the walls covered in charts and shark identification guides. "You know," James began, his voice soft but filled with emotion, "when that shark attacked me last year, I thought I'd lost everything. My ability to dive, my connection to the ocean, even my belief in the work we do." The room fell silent, all eyes on James as he continued. "But being down there today, seeing those animals in their natural habitat, it reminded me why we do this. These creatures aren't monsters. They're not mindless killing machines. They're a vital part of an ecosystem that's been in balance for millions of years." He looked around at his team, seeing the passion and dedication reflected in their eyes. "What we're doing here isn't just about protecting humans from sharks. It's about protecting sharks from us. It's about finding a way for two species, one ancient and perfectly adapted to its environment, the other newcomers with an outsized impact. to coexist. Lisa spoke up, her voice filled with quiet determination. The data we collected today supports what we've been saying all along. Shark behavior is predictable if we take the time to understand it. With the right precautions, we can minimize the risk of negative encounters without resorting to culls or nets. James nodded, a spark of excitement in his eyes. Exactly. And that's what we need to focus on moving forward. Education, smart beach management, continued research. We need to change the narrative around sharks. Help people see them as we do. Sam leaned forward, a mischievous grin on his face. So, what you're saying, Doc, is that we need to be the Sharks' PR team. A chuckle rippled through the room, breaking the tension. James smiled, grateful for Sam's ability to lighten the mood. In a manner of speaking, yes. But it's more than that. We need to be their advocates, their voice in a world that often misunderstands them. As the meeting wound down and the team began to disperse, James found himself drawn back to the deck of the ship. The night was clear, the stars reflected in the calm waters of Shark Bay. Somewhere out there, the sharks they had observed today were continuing their nightly patrols, unaware of the impact they had made on the humans studying them. Sam joined him at the railing, handing him a steaming mug of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts, Doc?" James took a sip, savoring the warmth. I was just thinking about how far we've come, Sam. A year ago, I was lying in a hospital bed wondering if I'd ever be able to do this work again. And now you're diving with great whites and planning shark PR campaigns. Sam finished with a grin. James chuckled, but his expression quickly turned serious. We've made progress, but we've still got a long way to go. There are still people out there who see sharks as nothing more than a threat to be eliminated. Sam nodded solemnly. True. But we're changing minds, one person at a time. Did you see the latest survey results? Public support for shark conservation in Shark Bay is up 30% since we started our education programs. It's a start, James agreed. But we need to think bigger. National campaigns, international cooperation. These animals don't recognize borders, after all. As they stood there, looking out over the moonlit bay, a fin broke the surface in the distance. Instead of the fear such a sight might have once inspired, James felt a surge of hope. "You know, Sam," he said softly, "I used to think my attack was the end of something. But now I see it was really a beginning. A chance to approach our work from a new perspective, to bridge the gap between fear and understanding." Sam raised his mug in a toast. "To new beginnings, then. And to the sharks. May they continue to swim free. Misunderstood, but magnificent." As they clinked mugs, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was still long, the challenges numerous. But he was ready to face them, armed with newfound courage and a deeper understanding of the creatures he had dedicated his life to studying. The great white that had nearly taken his life had also given him a new purpose. And as he stood there on the deck of the research vessel, the vast expanse of Shark Bay stretching out before him, Dr. James Hartley knew that his greatest work was still ahead of him. The sharks of Shark Bay had found their voice, their advocate, and James was determined to make sure that voice was heard, not just in Australia, but around the world. The battle to change hearts and minds, to foster understanding and respect for these magnificent predators, was just beginning. As the night wore on and the ship gently rocked on the waves, James's mind was already racing with plans for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps new encounters with the ocean's most misunderstood inhabitants. But for now, he was content to stand watch under the stars, a guardian of the deep and a bridge between two worlds. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Dr. James Hartley's phone buzzed insistently. Groggily, he reached for it, squinting at the bright screen in the dim light of dawn. "Hartley," he mumbled, his voice still thick with sleep. "James, it's Minister Thompson. We've got a situation." The urgency in the minister's voice immediately cut through James's drowsiness. Sitting up, James switched on the bedside lamp. "What's happened, Minister?" "There's been an incident at Coral Beach. A surfer was attacked about an hour ago." "It's bad, James, really bad." James felt his stomach drop. After months of progress, of changing minds and building trust, this was the scenario he'd been dreading. How bad are we talking? The minister's voice was grim. The surfer didn't make it. Local authorities are already calling for immediate action. I need you down there ASAP to assess the situation and advise on our response. I'm on my way, James said, already moving to get dressed. Please, Minister, urge them not to do anything drastic until I get there. As he hung up, James's mind raced. All the work they'd done, all the progress they'd made in changing public perception of sharks, it could all unravel in the wake of this tragedy. Within 30 minutes, James was in his car, speeding towards Coral Beach. He called Sam on the way, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Sam, I need you to gather the team and meet me at Coral Beach. There's been an attack. Sam's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the car's speakers. How bad? Fatal, James replied, his voice heavy. And if we're not careful, it could be fatal for our entire program too. As James pulled up to Coral Beach, the scene that greeted him was one of barely contained chaos. Police tape cordoned off a large section of the beach, where forensic teams were combing the sand. A crowd of onlookers had gathered, their faces a mix of shock, grief, and anger. James spotted Sam and the rest of his team near the lifeguard tower and made his way over. As he approached, he could hear heated voices. Can't just let these monsters roam free. A red-faced man was shouting at Sam. They need to be hunted down and killed before they take anyone else. Sam was trying to maintain his composure, but James could see the strain on his face. Sir, I understand you're upset, but culling isn't the answer. It's been proven ineffective and can actually increase the risk of— Bullshit, the man spat. Your research is worth jack when there's blood in the water. James stepped in, placing a calming hand on Sam's shoulder. Gentlemen, please, this is a tragedy for everyone involved. Why don't we take a step back and— Dr. Hartley, a voice cut through the tension. James turned to see Chief Inspector Roberts approaching, his face grave. Inspector, James nodded. What can you tell me about what happened? Roberts led James away from the crowd, speaking in low tones. Victim was a local surfer, Mark Tanner, 28 years old. Witnesses say he was about 100 meters offshore when he was hit. It was fast, probably a great white. James closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the tragedy. Have you been able to clear the beaches? Roberts nodded. We've closed all beaches within a 20-kilometer radius. But people are scared, Dr. Hartley. They're angry. They want action. I understand, James said, his mind already working on damage control. But we need to approach this rationally. Knee-jerk reactions won't prevent future tragedies. Just then, a commotion near the police tape caught their attention. A woman was trying to push past the officers, her face streaked with tears. That's Sarah Tanner, Roberts said quietly, the victim's sister. Before James could respond, Sarah spotted him and stormed over. You! She shouted, jabbing a finger at James's chest. This is your fault, you and your shark-loving friends. James held up his hands placatingly. Miss Tanner, I can't begin to imagine what you're going through. I'm so sorry for your loss. Sorry? She laughed bitterly. Sorry doesn't bring my brother back. You told everyone it was safe to go in the water. You said your programs would prevent this. The pain and accusation in her voice cut James to the core. He knew she was lashing out in grief, but her words struck a chord of truth. Had they become complacent? Had their success made them overlook the ever-present risks? You're right, James said softly, surprising Sarah into silence. We can never eliminate all risk. The ocean is not our domain, and entering it always carries some danger. But I promise you we will learn from this tragedy. We will do everything in our power to prevent it from happening again. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, her anger seeming to deflate slightly. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James took a deep breath. By understanding what happened, by studying the incident and the conditions that led to it, and by using that knowledge to improve our safety measures and educational programs. He gestured towards the water. The shark that took your brother's life isn't a monster. It's an animal acting on instinct in its natural habitat. Our job is to understand those instincts, to predict and mitigate the risks as best we can. Sarah shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. It's not enough, she said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. As she walked away, Sam approached James. That was intense, Doc. You okay? James nodded slowly. No, but we don't have time to dwell on it. We need to act fast if we're going to get ahead of this. Over the next few hours, James and his team worked tirelessly. They analyzed water conditions, interviewed witnesses, and pored over data from their tracking systems. By mid-afternoon, they had a preliminary report ready. James stood before a hastily assembled group of local officials, media representatives, and concerned citizens. The tension in the air was palpable as he began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here today was a tragedy. A life was lost, a family shattered, and a community shaken. There's no sugarcoating that fact. He paused, making eye contact with various members of the audience. But in times of crisis, it's crucial that we respond with reason and understanding, not fear and vengeance. A murmur went through the crowd, but James pressed on. Our initial findings suggest that several factors contributed to this incident. Unusually warm water temperatures have brought bait fish closer to shore, which in turn has attracted larger predators. Additionally, our tracking system detected a tagged great white in the area just minutes before the attack, but a technical glitch prevented the alert from being sent out. He held up a hand to forestall the angry outbursts. I'm not making excuses. These are explanations, and more importantly, they're areas where we can improve. We're already working on upgrading our alert system to prevent future glitches. We're also proposing increased drone surveillance during high-risk periods. A reporter called out, "But Dr. Hartley, isn't this proof that your non-lethal approach isn't working? Shouldn't we be considering more drastic measures?" James shook his head firmly. No, culls and nets might make us feel safer in the short term, but they're ecologically disastrous and ultimately ineffective. Sharks are highly migratory. Kill one, and another will simply move into the territory. He gestured towards the ocean. What we need is a deeper understanding of these animals and their behavior. Every incident, tragic as it is, provides us with valuable data that can help prevent future attacks. As the press conference wound down, James could sense a shift in the mood. The initial anger and fear were still present, but they were tempered now by a grudging understanding. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Later that evening, as the sun set over Shark Bay, James stood on the beach watching the play of light on the waves. The events of the day weighed heavily on him, but beneath the sorrow and guilt a steely determination was forming. Sam joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "Hell of a day, Doc." James nodded, taking a long drink. "That it was, Sam, that it was." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Sam spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we need to change our approach a bit." James raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Sam gestured towards the water. "We've been focusing so much on changing public perception of sharks. Maybe we need to put more emphasis on changing human behavior in shark territory." James nodded slowly, the gears in his mind turning. "You might be onto something there, Sam. Improved alert systems, better education on risk factors and safe behavior. We can't control the sharks, but we can better prepare people for encounters." As they discussed potential new initiatives, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. The tragedy at Coral Beach was a stark reminder of the risks inherent in their work, but it was also a call to action. "You know, Sam," James said as they turned to head back to the research center, "days like today, I'm reminded of something Jacques Cousteau once said. The sea, once it casts its spell, holds one in its net of wonder forever." He looked out at the darkening waters of Shark Bay. Our job isn't just to study these animals or to keep people safe. It's to help everyone see the wonder in the sea, sharks and all. It's a big task, but I think we're up for it. Sam grinned, clapping James on the shoulder, laughing. "Wouldn't want to be doing anything else, Doc." As they walked away, the sounds of the sea faded behind them. But in James's mind, the work was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new data to analyze, new minds to change. The sharks of Shark Bay had found their voice in him, and he was determined to make that voice heard. The incident at Coral Beach was a setback, yes, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to refine their methods, to deepen their understanding, and to strengthen their resolve. In the delicate balance between human safety and marine conservation, every challenge was a chance to learn and grow. As the lights of the research center came into view, James felt a familiar excitement building within him. The path ahead was challenging, but it was also filled with possibility. And for a scientist like James Hartley, possibility was the greatest motivator of all. The pre-dawn stillness of Shark Bay was shattered by the thrumming of helicopter blades. Dr. James Hartley squinted against the wind as he climbed aboard, his weathered face set in grim determination. Beside him, Sam double-checked their equipment, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by focused intensity. "You sure about this, Doc?" Sam shouted over the noise of the rotors. "We could send the drone team instead." James shook his head, securing his headset. "No, Sam. After everything that's happened, I need to see this for myself." As the helicopter lifted off, James's mind raced back over the events of the past week. The fatal attack at Coral Beach had been a turning point, forcing them to reevaluate their entire approach to shark management. But just as they were regaining their footing, nature had thrown them another curveball. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "ETA to the stranding site is 15 minutes, Dr. Hartley. Weather conditions are deteriorating, so we'll need to make this quick." James acknowledged the warning, his eyes scanning the coastline below. The first light of dawn was just beginning to break, revealing a desolate stretch of beach. And there, like pale ghosts in the early morning mist, were the massive forms of beached whales. As they approached, the scale of the tragedy became apparent. Dozens of sperm whales lay strewn across the sand, some still weakly thrashing, others ominously still. "My God," Sam breathed. "I've never seen a stranding this bad." James felt a lump form in his throat. In all his years studying marine life, mass strandings like this still had the power to shake him to his core. But there was no time for sentiment now. They had work to do. The helicopter touched down a safe distance from the whales, and James and Sam hit the ground running. They were met by Dr. Lisa Chen, who had arrived earlier with the first response team. "James, Sam, thank God you're here," Lisa called out, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. "We've got at least 30 individuals, mostly adult females and a few calves. We've managed to refloat 5 so far, but the tide's turning against us." James surveyed the scene, his scientific mind already analyzing the situation. "Any idea what caused this?" Lisa shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. "Nothing conclusive yet. No obvious signs of disease or injury. We're thinking it might be related to the unusual oceanographic conditions we've been tracking." James nodded grimly. The past month had seen a series of anomalies in Shark Bay. Warmer water temperatures, shifts in currents, unusual algal blooms. It was as if the very foundations of the ecosystem were shifting beneath their feet. "All right, let's get to work," James said, rolling up his sleeves. "Sam, coordinate with the volunteer teams. I want a full assessment of each animal's condition. Lisa, you and I will focus on the refloating efforts." For the next several hours, the beach was a flurry of activity. Volunteers poured water over the stranded whales to keep them cool, while others dug channels in the sand to help guide the animals back to deeper water. The air was filled with the haunting cries of the distressed whales and the shouts of rescuers. James worked tirelessly, moving from whale to whale, assessing their condition and directing rescue efforts. Despite the chaos, a part of his mind couldn't help but marvel at these magnificent creatures. Sperm whales, the largest toothed predators on the planet, capable of diving to depths no other mammal could reach, and yet, here they lay, vulnerable and dying on a sun-baked beach. As the morning wore on, it became clear that they were fighting a losing battle. For every whale they managed to refloat, 2 more seemed to beach themselves. The tide was now fully out, making their efforts even more challenging. James was helping to secure a harness around a particularly large female when he heard Sam calling his name urgently. "Doc, you need to see this!" Wiping the sweat from his brow, James made his way over to where Sam was crouched next to one of the beached whales. As he drew closer, he saw what had caught Sam's attention. The whale's flank was marked with a series of deep, parallel scars. "Shark bites," James murmured, running his hand gently over the healed wounds. "And judging by the size and spacing, I'd say they're from a great white." Sam nodded, his expression troubled. "That's what I thought too. But Doc, look at this." He pointed to a fresher set of marks near the whale's tail. James leaned in for a closer look, his breath catching as he realized what he was seeing. These weren't the clean surgical bites of a shark. They were jagged, almost serrated in appearance. What could have done this? Sam asked, voicing the question James was turning over in his mind. Before James could respond, a commotion further down the beach caught their attention. One of the volunteers was waving frantically, pointing out to sea. James and Sam rushed over, squinting against the glare of the sun now high in the sky. At first, James couldn't see what had caused the alarm. Then, about 100 yards offshore, a dorsal fin broke the surface. "Shark," someone in the crowd murmured, a note of fear in their voice. But James knew better. The fin was too large, too falcate to belong to any shark. As if to confirm his suspicion, a massive tail fluke rose out of the water before slapping down with tremendous force. "It's one of the whales," James said, a mix of relief and concern in his voice. "Probably a male based on the size, but something's not right. Its movements are erratic." As they watched, the whale continued to thrash in the shallows, its behavior becoming increasingly agitated. Then, with a final, powerful surge, it beached itself right in front of them. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the rescue team rushed to stabilize the new arrival. But as James approached to assess the animal, he felt his blood run cold. The whale's body was covered in fresh wounds, some still bleeding freely. But it wasn't the injuries themselves that shocked James. It was their nature. Mixed in with the unmistakable rake marks of shark teeth were other, more puzzling lacerations. Perfectly circular wounds peppered the whale's flanks, almost as if, "It looks like it's been attacked by giant squids," Lisa said, giving voice to the impossible thought forming in James's mind. That's not possible," Sam sputtered. "Giant squids are deep-sea creatures. They don't come anywhere near the surface, let alone into shallow bays." James shook his head slowly, his scientific mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. "Under normal circumstances, you'd be right, Sam. But nothing about this situation is normal." He turned to Lisa, his voice urgent. "We need to get tissue samples from these wounds immediately. And I want a full necropsy on any whales we can't save. Something is very, very wrong here." As the day wore on, the situation on the beach grew increasingly grim. Despite their best efforts, more than half of the stranded whales had died. The survivors they managed to refloat seemed disoriented, many of them restranding themselves almost immediately. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in among the rescue teams. James stood at the water's edge, watching as another refloated whale disappeared beneath the waves, silently praying it would keep swimming out to sea this time. "Dr. Hartley?" A hesitant voice broke through his reverie. He turned to see Sarah Tanner, the sister of the surfer killed in the shark attack, standing nearby. "Ms. Tanner," James said, surprised. I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed, whether from tears or exhaustion. James couldn't tell. "I saw the news about the stranding. I thought maybe I could help." James felt a lump form in his throat. Here was this woman, still grieving the loss of her brother, choosing to come out and help save other lives. It was a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. "We could always use more hands," he said softly. "But are you sure you're up for this? It's not easy work." Sarah squared her shoulders, a determined look in her eyes. "My brother loved the ocean, Dr. Hartley. All of it, the beauty and the danger. I think he'd want me to be here." James nodded, a newfound respect for this woman blossoming in his chest. "All right then, let's get you briefed on the situation." As he led Sarah towards the volunteer coordination area, James couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. If they could bridge the gap between fear and understanding, between grief and purpose, maybe there was hope for changing the wider public's perception of marine conservation. The sun was setting by the time they called an end to the day's rescue efforts. Of the original 30 stranded whales, they had managed to successfully refloat and guide out to sea just 8. The beach was now littered with the massive corpses of those they couldn't save, a grim reminder of the day's tragedy. James gathered his core team, Sam, Lisa, and now Sarah, for a debrief. They huddled together in the lee of their mobile command center, cups of strong coffee warming their hands against the chill of the evening air. "All right, let's go over what we know," James began, his voice weary but focused. "Lisa, what did the preliminary tissue analyses show?" Lisa consulted her tablet, her brow furrowed. "It's puzzling, to say the least. We're seeing signs of extreme tissue damage, not just from the obvious external injuries, but at a cellular level. It's almost as if these animals were exposed to some kind of intense pressure or stress before they stranded. Could it be sonar?" Sam suggested. "Military exercises have been known to cause mass strandings in other parts of the world." James shook his head. "Unlikely. There's been no reported naval activity in the area. Plus, that wouldn't explain the squid attacks. No, this is something else." He turned to Sarah, who had been quietly listening. "Sarah, you grew up in this area. Have you ever seen or heard of anything like this before?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "Not exactly like this, no, but..." She hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "Go on," James encouraged gently. "Well, there are stories, old stories, passed down by the indigenous people of this coast. They talk about times when the sea would become angry, when the creatures of the deep would rise to the surface." Sam scoffed lightly. "Sounds like typical folklore to me." But James held up a hand, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe, maybe not. Often these old stories have a kernel of truth to them. They might be describing real environmental phenomena, just in more mythological terms." He stood up, pacing as he thought aloud. What if we're dealing with some kind of large-scale oceanic disturbance? Something that's disrupting the entire food chain, from the deep sea all the way up to these whales?" Lisa's eyes widened. "The oceanographic anomalies we've been tracking, the temperature changes, the current shifts, could they be related?" James nodded, excitement building in his voice despite his exhaustion. "It's possible. We need to expand our research scope. I want deep-sea surveys, water column analyses, the works. We need to understand what's happening in every layer of the ocean, from the surface all the way down to the abyssal plain." Sam let out a low whistle. "That's a tall order, Doc. We're talking about a massive undertaking here." "I know," James said, his voice filled with determination. "But we have to try. What we're seeing here with these whales, it could be just the tip of the iceberg. If there's some kind of major oceanic shift happening, the implications could be enormous." He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze intense. "This goes beyond just shark conservation now. We could be looking at a fundamental change in the entire marine ecosystem of Shark Bay, maybe even the whole Indian Ocean." Sarah spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "How can I help? I know I'm not a scientist, but I want to be part of this." James smiled at her, feeling a surge of gratitude for this unexpected ally. "Your local knowledge could be invaluable, Sarah, and we're going to need all the support we can get from the community as we ramp up our research efforts." As the meeting broke up and they prepared to head back to the research center, James took one last look at the beach. The bodies of the whales loomed like dark islands in the fading light, a somber reminder of the day's losses. But as he watched, he saw something that made his breath catch. A pod of dolphins had appeared in the shallows, their dorsal fins cutting through the calm evening waters. They moved with purpose, herding a group of fish towards the beach. And there, waiting in the surf, were several of the surviving whales they had refloated earlier. "Look," James said softly, pointing. The team watched in awe as the dolphins corralled the fish right into the waiting mouths of the weakened whales. It was a remarkable display of interspecies cooperation, one that James had read about but never witnessed firsthand. "It's like they're helping them regain their strength," Sarah murmured, wonder in her voice. James nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. "That's the thing about the ocean," he said. "Just when you think you've seen it all, it shows you something new, something wonderful." As they turned to leave, James's mind was already racing with plans for their expanded research initiative. The stranding was a tragedy, yes, but it had also opened their eyes to a much larger mystery unfolding in the waters of Shark Bay. Whatever was happening out there in the deep, whatever forces were at play beneath the surface, James was determined to uncover the truth. Not just for the sake of scientific knowledge, but for the well-being of all the creatures that called these waters home. From the microscopic plankton to the massive whales, and yes, even the much-maligned sharks. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them back to the research center, James gazed out at the vast expanse of Shark Bay. The sun had set, leaving the water a deep, inscrutable blue. Somewhere out there, ancient forces were at work, reshaping the underwater world in ways they were only beginning to understand. It was a daunting challenge, but as James looked at his team, the dedicated scientists and the grieving sister-turned-unexpected ally, he felt a surge of hope. Together, they would unravel this mystery. And in doing so, they just might forge a new understanding between humans and the complex, beautiful, sometimes dangerous world beneath the waves. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for Dr. James Hartley, marine biologist and unlikely crusader for the misunderstood creatures of the deep, it was a journey he was ready to undertake. The echoes of the stranded whale's cries still rang in his ears, a haunting reminder of the work that lay ahead. But mixed with that sorrow was a fierce determination. The ocean was changing, and with it, the delicate balance of life in Shark Bay. It was up to them to understand those changes, to adapt, and to find a way for humans and marine life to coexist in this brave new world. As the lights of the research center came into view, James allowed himself a small smile. The greatest adventure of his scientific career was just beginning. The control room of the research vessel Carcharodon hummed with tension. Dr. James Hartley leaned over the main console, his eyes fixed on the live feed from the deep-sea ROV, remotely operated vehicle, as it descended into the abyss of Shark Bay. The soft blue glow of the monitors cast shadows across his weathered face, accentuating the lines of concentration etched there. "Passing 800 meters," announced Lisa, her fingers dancing across the ROV's control panel. "Still no sign of the anomaly." James nodded, his mind racing. It had been 3 weeks since the mass stranding of sperm whales, and in that time, they had detected a series of increasingly bizarre oceanic disturbances, unexplained temperature fluctuations, erratic currents, and most alarmingly, a large area of the deep-sea floor that seemed to be shifting. "Wait!" Sam called out, pointing to one of the auxiliary screens. "Did you see that?" James squinted at the display. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of movement at the edge of the ROV's lights, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Probably just marine snow," Lisa suggested, though her tone betrayed her uncertainty. James wasn't convinced. "Take us deeper, Lisa, and widen the light array. Whatever's down there, I want to see it." As the ROV continued its descent, James felt the familiar mix of excitement and apprehension that came with exploring the unknown. He had spent his career studying the ocean, but moments like these reminded him just how little they truly understood about the deep. Suddenly, the main screen erupted in a frenzy of movement. Thousands of bioluminescent creatures swarmed past the ROV, their lights creating a dazzling display. "Incredible," James breathed. "I've never seen an aggregation like this at this depth." Sam was already analyzing the footage. "Mostly krill and small squid, but look, there are deeper dwelling species mixed in. It's like the whole water column is churning." Before James could respond, a much larger shape loomed into view. The team collectively gasped as a giant squid, easily 12 meters long, glided past the camera. Its enormous eye seemed to stare directly at them before it disappeared back into the gloom. "That's impossible," Lisa whispered. "Giant squid don't come this close to shore, and certainly not in these numbers." James felt a chill run down his spine. "Unless something is driving them here. Take us all the way down, Lisa. I want to see the sea floor." As the ROV approached the bottom, the water grew increasingly turbid. Clouds of sediment obscured their view, forcing Lisa to navigate by sonar. "We should be seeing the bottom now," she reported, frustration evident in her voice. "But the sonar is giving strange readings. It's like the seafloor is moving." James leaned in closer, straining to make sense of the swirling sediment on the screen. Slowly, a shape began to emerge from the murk. At first, he thought it was a rock formation, but then he realized with a start that it was moving. "My God," he breathed. "Is that what I think it is?" The sediment cleared just enough to reveal an enormous eye, easily the size of a dinner plate, staring directly into the ROV's camera. It blinked once, and then the creature, whatever it was, began to rise. "Pull us back," James shouted, but Lisa was already reversing the ROV's thrusters. The main screen filled with a mass of writhing tentacles as the creature ascended. For a brief moment, James caught a glimpse of a beak-like mouth opening wide before the ROV's signal abruptly cut out. Alarms blared throughout the control room as they lost contact with the deep-sea probe. James slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling from what they had just witnessed. "Tell me someone got that on record," he said weakly. Sam nodded, already pulling up the saved footage. "Every second. Though I'm not sure I believe what I'm seeing." James stood, pacing the small confines of the control room. "We need to analyze every frame of that footage, and I want all our sensor data from the past month compiled and cross-referenced. Whatever that thing was, it's at the heart of the changes we've been seeing." As the team set to work, James stepped out onto the deck of the ship, needing a moment to clear his head. The night air was cool on his face, carrying the tang of salt and the faint metallic scent of an approaching storm. He gazed out at the dark waters of Shark Bay, knowing that somewhere beneath the placid surface, an ancient leviathan was stirring. The implications were staggering. If creatures of that size were moving into shallower waters, it could disrupt the entire marine ecosystem. "Penny, for your thoughts?" James turned to see Sarah approaching, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. He accepted the offered coffee gratefully. "Just trying to wrap my head around what we saw down there," he admitted. "In all my years studying the ocean, I've never encountered anything like it." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It reminds me of the stories my grandmother used to tell, about the great spirits that lived in the deep, keeping balance in the sea." James raised an eyebrow. "You think there might be some truth to those old tales?" "I don't know," Sarah replied with a small shrug. "But after what I've seen these past few weeks, I'm starting to think there's a lot more to the ocean than we understand." Their conversation was interrupted by Sam, bursting onto the deck, his face flushed with excitement. "Doc, you need to see this," he panted. "We've compiled the data from our sensor boys, and, well, you should just come look." Back in the control room, Lisa had pulled up a 3D model of Shark Bay on the main screen. As James watched, she overlaid the data from their ocean monitoring network. "Watch this," she said, setting the model in motion. James leaned in, his eyes widening as he saw the patterns emerge. Currents that had remained stable for decades were shifting, creating new upwellings and eddies. Temperature gradients were fluctuating wildly, and most alarmingly, there was a clear pattern of deep-sea creatures moving into shallower waters. "It's like the entire bay is being stirred," Sam said, voicing what they were all thinking. James nodded grimly. "And I'd bet my career that our tentacled friend down there is the one doing the stirring. The question is, why?" As if in answer to his question, a low, mournful sound echoed through the ship. James felt it more than heard it, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate in his bones. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed. Lisa was already checking the instruments. "Some kind of bioacoustic signal. Extremely low frequency, but incredibly powerful. It's like whale song, but deeper, older." Another sound joined the first, this one higher pitched and undeniably distressed. James recognized it immediately. "That's a sperm whale," he said. "And it sounds scared." Without hesitation, James began issuing orders. "Lisa, plot a course towards that sound. Sam, ready the hydrophones and recording equipment. Sarah, I need you to contact the local authorities. If we've got a pod of whales in distress, we may need to coordinate a rescue effort." As the team sprang into action, James felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. Whatever was happening out there in the dark waters of Shark Bay, they were about to be in the thick of it. The Carcharodon cut through the waves, guided by the haunting whale songs. As they neared the source of the sounds, the sea around them began to churn. Bioluminescent creatures swarmed just beneath the surface, creating an eerie, glowing wake. "Multiple large contacts ahead," Lisa called out from the bridge. "Definitely whales, but there's something else. Something bigger." James grabbed a pair of night vision binoculars and rushed to the bow. Through the green-tinted lenses, he could make out the sleek forms of sperm whales, their bodies gleaming in the moonlight. But they were behaving erratically, clustering together in a tight group instead of their usual loose formation. And then he saw it. A massive tentacle, easily as thick as the ship's mast, broke the surface near the pod. It writhed in the air for a moment before plunging back down, sending waves crashing against the boat's hull. "My God," James breathed. "It's hunting them." The next few minutes were chaos. The whales scattered, their powerful flukes churning the water to foam as they tried to escape. But the Leviathan was faster, its tentacles lashing out with terrifying speed and precision. "We have to do something," Sarah cried, her face pale with shock and fear. James's mind raced. They were vastly outmatched in terms of size and strength. But perhaps the acoustic deterrent system, he said suddenly. "Sam, is it operational?" Sam nodded, already moving towards the controls. "Untested at this scale, but it's ready." "Do it," James ordered. Full power. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the ship's experimental acoustic deterrent system powered up, designed to create an uncomfortable sound barrier for sharks. They had no idea how it would affect a creature of this size. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, the massive tentacles withdrew. The churning water settled, and an eerie silence fell over the bay. "Did it work?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Before anyone could answer, a colossal form began to rise from the depths. In the ship's spotlights, they could see a body larger than a blue whale, covered in a complex pattern of chromatophores that shifted and swirled like living paint. Tentacles as thick as tree trunks coiled around it, and at the center a single enormous eye opened, fixing them with an alien gaze of unmistakable intelligence. For a breathless moment, the creature regarded them. James felt as though he was being weighed, judged by something so ancient and unknowable that his entire understanding of the ocean, of life itself, seemed to shrink in comparison. Then, with a grace that belied its enormous size, the Leviathan began to sink back into the depths. As it descended, James could have sworn he saw patterns of light rippling across its skin, almost like, "It's communicating," he whispered in awe. The creature disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind a sea as smooth as glass. The whales, seemingly unharmed, began to regroup, their clicks and whistles filling the air with what sounded almost like confused conversation. As the adrenaline of the encounter began to fade, James found himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a new species. It was a paradigm shift, a living legend that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about marine life. "Doc," Sam's voice broke through his reverie. "You might want to see this." On the main screen, a series of patterns were scrolling by, the bioluminescent signals they had observed on the creature's skin, now translated into data. "It's going to take time to decipher," Lisa said, her voice filled with excitement and trepidation in equal measure. "But I think it was trying to communicate with us." James stared at the screen, his mind reeling with the implications. If they could establish communication with this creature, understand its motivations for moving into shallower waters. "All right, team," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions inside him. "We've got work to do. I want all hands on deck for this. Sarah, we're going to need your grandmother's stories, any scrap of local legend or lore about deep-sea creatures. Sam, Lisa, start analyzing that bioluminescent data. I'll reach out to our contacts in marine biology and oceanography. We're going to need a broader pool of expertise for this." As the team dispersed to their tasks, James took one last look out at the now calm waters of Shark Bay. Somewhere out there, an ancient being was lurking, a creature that challenged everything they thought they knew about the ocean. The sharks that had been the focus of his life's work now seemed almost quaint in comparison. But James realized that his mission hadn't changed. It had expanded. Whether it was misunderstood sharks or colossal deep-sea dwellers, his job was to bridge the gap between the human world and the mysteries of the ocean. As the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. They stood on the brink of a discovery that could change the world's understanding of marine life forever, and he was determined to see it through, no matter where the currents might take them. "Prepare to head back to shore," he instructed Lisa. "We need to regroup, resupply, and come up with a plan. Something tells me this is just the beginning of a much bigger adventure." As the Carcharodon turned towards home, James couldn't help but smile. In all his years of studying the ocean, he had never felt more like an explorer, venturing into uncharted waters. The Leviathan had changed everything, but it had also reminded him of why he fell in love with marine biology in the first place. The endless capacity of the ocean to surprise, to inspire, and to humble. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets the depths of Shark Bay still held, James Hartley was ready to face them. With his team by his side and a world of discovery stretching out before them, he felt more alive than he had in years. The ocean, it seemed, still had plenty of stories to tell, and he, for one, couldn't wait to hear them.